Have you ever wondered how an ordinary farm could become the scene of a high-stakes showdown involving secret agents, foreign operatives, and even the President of the United States? Welcome to the heart-pounding story of a desperate winter rescue that spirals into an urgent mission to protect our nation's most guarded secrets. In the middle of a fierce blizzard, a lone farmer stumbles upon a family nearly frozen inside their stranded car, only to discover they aren't ordinary travelers. As sinister forces close in, it becomes a race against time and nature to preserve crucial evidence hidden on the farm's very soil. Will the farmer's quick thinking and courage be enough to save these unexpected guests and possibly the entire country from looming disaster? If you're intrigued by conspiracies, survival, and everyday heroes stepping up at life's most critical moments, you won't want to miss the full tale. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an incredible story like this, and join us as we uncover every twist and turn of this unforgettable journey. Micah Caldwell stood by his frost-laced kitchen window, the aroma of his untouched coffee rising to meet him as he stared across the white expanse of his land. For 3 generations, the Caldwell family had farmed this 180-acre peach orchard in Hollow Creek Township, a place so quiet that any unexpected vehicle stood out. Yet there they were, unmarked black SUVs, rolling up to his gates one after another, each coated in a veneer of fresh snow that seemed to cling like an unwelcome omen. Micah counted 18 of them in total. In the harsh morning light, they wove along the narrow, slushy path as if this remote piece of farmland were suddenly the most important place on earth. Yesterday, he had been a man preoccupied with warming his storage areas so the winter harvest wouldn't freeze, tapping the sides of his generator to keep it running in the record-breaking sub-zero temperatures. Now his property resembled some kind of high-profile secure facility. His German Shepherd Ranger pressed a wet nose against his leg, sensing his owner's tension. The dog was a constant companion, well-trained, loyal, and attuned to every shift in Micah's mood. Ranger whined, pawing at Micah's jeans as the black-suited men and women, each with an earpiece and a hardened expression, fanned out across the orchard. Near the newly renovated barn, something Micah had poured his dwindling savings into. Several of these strangers stood in tight clusters, whispering into their cuffs or scanning the perimeter with practiced intensity. It was in that very barn where just hours earlier, Micah had helped a desperate family of 4 thaw out from the brink of hypothermia. The memory of leading them through a near impenetrable blizzard was still fresh in his mind, as vivid as the swirling snow had been. That family's arrival was initially as baffling as this sudden government intrusion. Micah had discovered them purely by chance during a final check on the orchard's eastern access road, an area prone to drifting snow. He'd been worried about the road icing up so badly that deliveries and any chance of a little extra income would be impossible. Instead, he'd found a sedan half buried in the snow engine, dead, and 4 figures inside. One glance told him they were in immediate danger of succumbing to the subarctic temperatures. Their car's exhaust pipe had already clogged with snow, and the father could barely form coherent words. The mother, clutching a whimpering 5-year-old girl, managed a hoarse plea for help as Micah pried the door open. A 7-year-old boy stared at him with wide, glassy eyes. Bringing them to safety had been a battle in itself. Between the stinging wind and the relentless snowdrifts, Micah felt like he was shoving his body through an endless barrier of ice. The father was delirious, half limping with every step. The mother clung to the children, hugging them close to her body for warmth. Ranger barked instructions in the only way a dog could, by sprinting back and forth, leading them to the barn. Once inside, Micah used heated blankets and whatever medical knowledge he had from a few first aid courses in college. He offered them warm water and hot broth, waiting for their core temperatures to rise. Only after they settled did he notice the children's surprising composure. Even half frozen, they listened to their parents' instructions without question, betraying none of the typical panic he would have expected from kids lost in a storm. That was strange enough, but stranger still were the items he found on the father. Once he was coherent enough to peel off his soaked layers. Among them, Micah discovered an unusual badge, blue and silver, with some advanced embedded chip, unlike any standard government ID he'd ever encountered. And then there was the handcuffed briefcase. Even in his severely weakened condition, the father refused to part with it. Micah had only succeeded in helping him remove the cuff when the mother pleaded tearfully that he was dying from the cold. With no power in the phone lines overnight, Micah couldn't immediately call the authorities. By dawn, the landline was back, and he'd managed to place a call to the local emergency dispatcher. The moment he mentioned the odd ID badge, the dispatcher's tone changed, becoming tight and formal. looking out the window. Now Micah felt the magnitude of what he'd stepped into. 18 black SUVs in his yard and more were rumored to be on their way. Troops, and he couldn't help but think of them that way, wearing dark suits, scanning corners and crevices of a farm that should have been blanketed in nothing more than peach tree rows and a gentle hush of winter. The orchard, once the pride of his grandfather, who had first purchased it during the Great Depression, was now a stage for national-level intrigue. Micah lowered his untouched coffee mug to the counter. Outside, a swirl of new flakes fell, as if the relentless blizzard was conspiring with the suits who had so thoroughly invaded his property overnight. It had all started with the storm. Meteorologists had dubbed it Icebound Fury, a polar vortex that smashed temperature records across the Midwest, plunging towns and cities to minus 30 degrees. And below, power grids went dark. Under the sheer strain, roads were ordered closed by local officials, and communities were urged to hunker down. Micah had no choice but to adapt. Orchard life demanded resilience no matter what nature threw at you. He'd spent the previous day rigging extra insulation around his generator and hauling in fuel reserves, conscious of how a single freeze could ruin the last of his winter yields. The orchard's specialized heating system was vital for keeping his carefully cultivated late-season peaches from turning into blocks of ice, peaches that could be sold for a premium, giving him a fighting chance to keep the farm afloat. He'd nearly finished those preparations when he drove to the orchard's far boundary. Snow, there often piled waist-high, threatening to bury the access road that connected to his old processing facility. A single glance at the drifts told him no one in their right mind would attempt to travel through that area. But that was precisely where he found the stranded family. Their sedan was angled precariously, almost invisible, under the gathering snowfall. It took everything in Micah's power just to stomp through those drifts. Ranger, usually restless and energetic, had been subdued by the fierce cold, but he still bounded ahead to sniff at the car. Despite wearing thick gloves, Micah's fingers quickly went numb, and every step was like wading through wet concrete. By the time he knocked on the sedan's window, the wind roared so loudly that he could barely hear his own voice. The father tried to roll the window down, but the motor was dead, and layers of ice locked the glass in place. Micah cleared enough snow to pry open the door. Inside were 4 sets of frightened eyes, though as he quickly noticed, the children seemed unnaturally calm. They were in dire straits. The father's skin was chalky white, his breath shallow. The mother's arms and legs shook from either the cold or the adrenaline, or both. Her grip on her younger child was almost claw-like, as if letting go might doom them all. The other child, an older boy, held his sister's hand. Micah coaxed them to move, offering reassurances, though the father could barely respond. He carried the father as the mother cradled the smaller child, the older boy struggling along behind. Even Ranger helped, barking encouragement whenever they slowed. By sheer will, Micah got them to his renovated barn. That barn, ironically, was never meant to shelter travelers from a lethal storm. Micah had rebuilt it for storing orchard equipment and hosting seasonal workers, adding a small office and a modest lounge area. Now it became a temporary medical unit. He rummaged for blankets, sleeping bags, and anything that could help raise body temperatures. The children needed immediate warming measures, so he handed them cups of hot broth, letting the steam thaw their raw skin. The father, still close to incoherent, clung to his briefcase. Seeing the handcuff made Micah wonder if he was a security guard or some sort of secret courier. The mother murmured thank you over and over, trembling in the barn's relative warmth. Micah's mind buzzed with questions, but the night demanded urgent focus on simply keeping them alive. He left them to rest, stepping out only to check that the orchard's generator was still running. The winds howled, rattling the beams of the barn. Ranger stayed glued to Micah's side, ears perked and body tense. He sensed that something was amiss. In the quiet moments when Micah returned to the barn, he overheard hushed words, talk of executive protocols, continuity measures, and coded references he couldn't piece together. At one point, the father, delirious as he was, fiddled with what looked like a satellite phone that should have been knocked out by the storm. Micah heard him speak a strange sentence. Evergreen is secure, awaiting exfil, or something similarly cryptic. By the time the temperature rose a fraction and dawn broke, lines of communication were returning piecemeal. Micah's landline crackled back to life for a few precious minutes, which he used to call emergency services. He gave them the father's name. Joseph Langford gleaned from the ID found in his wallet and mentioned the peculiar silver and blue badge. Instantly, the dispatcher's voice changed tone, becoming clipped. The call ended with a dispatcher urging Micah to stay put and expect immediate contact from higher authorities. At first, Micah assumed they would send a county rescue team or at most a state trooper. Instead, those black SUVs arrived in droves. With them came a wave of suited individuals whose seriousness bordered on ominous. And that was how Micah found himself standing in his kitchen, looking out at a de facto government fortress occupying his orchard. Something in his gut told him that the father, this Joseph Langford, and his family were at the center of a situation that went far beyond a simple rescue in a snowstorm. Shortly after the arrival of the SUVs, a tall, stern-faced woman with a dark overcoat stepped onto Micah's porch. She walked with the assurance of someone who commanded authority and was used to quick compliance. Two agents flanked her, scanning the property for threats. Ranger, usually sociable, stood at rigid attention. Fur raised along his spine, Micah opened the door, determined to find out what in the world was happening on his land. The woman introduced herself as Director Alexandra Bennett of the Presidential Security Division. She flashed credentials so official-looking that Micah felt his pulse spike. In all his time, he'd never seen a government badge like that. Holographic seals, microtext, and layered emblems. Bennett wasted no time explaining that the family in the barn was no ordinary family. The father was Secretary Joseph Langford, head of the Department of Treasury, fourth in line to the presidency. The mother, Marina Langford, also held a significant position. Their two children, Tim and Ella, were minors, but clearly trained in protocol far beyond a normal family's routine. As if the revelation that he'd saved the Treasury Secretary from freezing to death wasn't enough, Director Bennett clarified that Langford wasn't out here by happenstance. A top-secret government relocation procedure had been activated due to the extreme weather and potential threats to national infrastructure. Hollow Creek Township, with its remote location and certain hidden facilities, was part of a continuity of government plan. Langford had been on a route with a convoy to a classified bunker designated as Safe House Delta. When the blizzard split the vehicles, Micah's orchard was never supposed to be the final stop. The sedan carrying Langford and his family had simply become separated and lost a glitch in a heavily orchestrated procedure. Yet the government's intense presence indicated something far more clandestine was at play. While Bennett spoke, her agents erected communication arrays in Micah's yard, portable satellite dishes, advanced sensors, and an entire suite of hardware that looked like it belonged in a war zone. Black SUVs, presumably filled with specialized gear, surrounded the barn where Langford's family recuperated. Overhead helicopters circled some of them, sporting the presidential seal. The swirl of snow made them barely visible, but their thunderous rotor blades cut the air like repeated declarations of looming trouble. The mention of the president's direct involvement startled Micah. Director Bennett confirmed that President Emmett Gardner himself was heading toward the orchard. Micah found this unbelievable, that a lethal blizzard and a battered orchard should host the leader of the free world. Bennett, spotting Micah's incredulity, explained that the catastrophic weather had triggered the fallback protocols. With multiple states under emergency, it was standard procedure for high-level officials, including the president, to relocate to secure sites. The orchard's classification as a node in the Heartland grid made it pivotal for emergency communications. Micah listened, numb with shock, his gaze drifting to Ranger for some semblance of normalcy. Then Bennett dropped another revelation. The father's bulletproof briefcase held more than mere documents. It allegedly contained high-level intelligence crucial to the nation's security. Langford's refusal to relinquish it was a sign of both the severity of its contents and the specialized training each family member possessed. As Micah recalled the children's oddly disciplined behavior, it all began to align. These were not typical civilians who blundered into a storm. Then came yet another layer of confusion. Bennett received word via her earpiece that an unresponsive convoy was approaching from the north. These vehicles bore diplomatic plates from the nation of Krolovnia, a formidable Eastern European state that had been at odds with the U.S. over election interference and economic sanctions. They weren't answering hails, and intelligence suggested they could be seeking Langford, or more specifically, whatever he carried in that briefcase. Immediately, Bennett ordered a condition yellow, instructing her agents to prepare for confrontation. Micah found it all surreal, equal parts thriller movie and terrifying reality. The orchard's gentle rows were coated in fresh snow, as if the world itself wanted to bury any sign of conflict. Yet all around him, men and women in black suits took cover behind vehicles, while others brandished firearms. He'd only wanted to rescue 4 helpless people from the cold. Now he was at the center of some enormous geopolitical standoff. As if the tension weren't high enough, Bennett also mentioned that Nexalon Global Industries, a massive private defense and technology conglomerate with rumored ties to Krolovnia, had helicopters inbound. Nexalon's role wasn't yet clear, but speculation ran wild. With roads shut, only well-equipped parties, government or otherwise, could maneuver in the monstrous cold. The orchard was on the cusp of becoming a battlefield. Micah sensed the adrenaline pumping through his veins, a flashback to his own military service years ago before he'd returned to cultivate the family orchard. "I need you to trust me," Bennett had said. "We don't know who we can trust beyond this perimeter, but we do know that if Secretary Langford and his briefcase fall into the wrong hands, the consequences could destabilize the country's chain of command." Micah nodded grimly, acknowledging the weight of it. He was no stranger to duty, but he never imagined it would materialize as armed suits on his land, foreign diplomats pushing their way in the potential infiltration of private contractors. Ranger, picking up on his resolute tone, quieted his growling. The dog seemed ready to stand at Micah's side, no matter who or what threatened them. The hours that followed were a dizzying mix of logistical maneuvers and nerve-wracking confrontations. Krylovnian vehicles, sleek and dark, arrived in the swirling snow, forming their own perimeter, in direct opposition to the U.S. Secret Service detail. Their drivers stepped out, many sporting the posture of ex-military. One particularly tall figure, later identified as Ambassador Nikolai Novikov, walked calmly into a tense middle ground to negotiate with Director Bennett. Their discussion was hushed, but from what Micah could glean through the communications chatter, Novikov insisted they were there to protect Secretary Langford based on credible intelligence that local militia groups intended to assassinate him. It reeked of a pretext. Bennett and her agents saw it for what it was, a stalling tactic to glean confirmation that Langford was in fact at this orchard. Meanwhile, Nexalon's helicopters hovered close enough that Micah could see the glow of their searchlights through the white haze. Director Bennett declared a protocol diamondback, an unusual measure that signaled a multi-front threat scenario. She barked orders into her wrist microphone, directing the orchard's security teams to hold their ground and engage only if forced. Within the barn, a new crisis erupted. The specialized heating system, keeping Langford and his family stable, suddenly malfunctioned, dropping the ambient temperature dramatically. Tech-savvy agents scrambled to diagnose the problem, but discovered sabotage. The lines funneling warm air into the barn had been cut, and the backup generator was unresponsive. The chain of potential culprits was endless. Krylovnia and Nexalon, or even internal traders. Regardless, with the barn no longer viable, Langford's medical team insisted on relocating him and his family into the main farmhouse for safety. Micah was asked about alternative routes, quickly suggesting an old underground corridor that connected the barn to the farmhouse, something the Caldwell family had built to transport harvested peaches without exposing them to severe weather. Agents seized on that plan. They would escort Langford and his family through the orchard's subterranean passage, away from the prying eyes of Krylovnian spotters and Nexalon's high-tech sensors. A stealth transfer. As this was set in motion, the orchard's calm was shattered by sporadic gunfire. Through camera feeds on an agent's tablet, Micah saw that at least one Krylovnian operative had tried to breach the perimeter near the barn, prompting the Secret Service to respond. The firefight was minimal warning shots and disabling a suspicious vehicle, but it signaled that the standoff was dangerously close to erupting into full-blown violence. Meanwhile, from overhead, the rotor thunder of Nexalon helicopters grew louder. If they decided to land en masse, the orchard might become a multi-party battleground in the midst of a historic blizzard. In the midst of this upheaval, news arrived that President Gardner was diverting his motorcade yet again. He'd initially intended to arrive by the main access route, but after hearing about the Krylovnian blockade and possible sabotage, he chose an alternate path through remote fire trails skirting the orchard's northern boundary. Such a route was barely passable in the best of conditions, let alone in this monstrous storm, but advanced vehicles in the presidential caravan, along with an unwavering determination, could make the impossible merely daunting. It was at this juncture that Micah questioned the president's motives. Why was he so intent on coming here to a place so clearly compromised in the middle of a lethal storm? The orchard was an obvious security liability, no matter how many agents Bennett had deployed. If the president insisted on meeting Secretary Langford personally, perhaps the rift ran deeper than mere protocol. Could the president be part of what Langford was trying to prevent? Or was it the other way around? Maybe Gardner aimed to personally ensure Langford's safety. Micah's mind reeled. He had once prided himself on leaving behind a life of danger. After finishing his service, he dreamed only of reviving the orchard with new crops and modern irrigation. Now he was maneuvering among federal agents, foreign operatives, and corporate mercenaries. In a single day, this farm had become the epicenter of an international crisis. During a brief lull, an agent approached Micah and calmly handed him a bulletproof vest. He recognized it as a specialized Kevlar laminate model favored by certain government units. Confused but understanding the gravity, he donned it, focusing on not letting his nerves betray him. For a fleeting moment, he recalled his father's words. Our orchard stands for self-reliance. When storms come, we face them. Perhaps the man had never imagined a storm of this magnitude, but the philosophy resonated now more than ever. Ranger remained close, occasionally letting out a low growl. If an unfamiliar agent got too near Micah, found it oddly reassuring. The dog's vigilance mirrored his own state of high alert. He kept a shotgun nearby, passed down from his grandfather, though he hoped fervently he would not have to use it. The orchard's soil, so cherished and painstakingly farmed, would never look the same if blood were spilled upon it. In the span of just a few hours, the orchard had been carved into zones of control. Director Bennett's Secret Service teams dominated the immediate vicinity of the main farmhouse and the connecting passages, while an outer ring of conflict zones manifested where the Krylovnian vehicles had stalled. Off to the west, Nexalon's hired security moved in chilling precision, setting up what looked like sensor arrays or jamming equipment. The orchard's trees, bare and dormant in the winter cold, provided scant cover, so both sides used the swirling snow as a shield, with the temperature plummeting to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The line between survival and fatality was razor thin. Even the best gear only gave you so many minutes outside before frostbite or hypothermia set in. This fact alone might have slowed any impetus for all-out combat. No one wanted to wage a firefight under such lethal conditions. The orchard's swirling winds not only masked movement, but stung the eyes of anyone not wearing specialized goggles. Meanwhile, Secretary Langford's situation took on new urgency. The sabotage in the barn meant he and his family had to move swiftly. Bundled in thermal blankets, accompanied by paramedics disguised as simple agents, the Langfords trudged into the orchard's subterranean corridor leading from the barn to the main house. Micah watched through a grainy security camera feed as the small group navigated the tight passage, the father still clutching his handcuffed briefcase, even in his weakened state. Yet the orchard was riddled with watchers. Ambassador Novikov seemed to sense, or perhaps already know, that Langford was on the move. Agents reported that Krylovnian operatives had repositioned their SUVs to cut off possible egress routes. Nexalon helicopters roamed overhead, occasionally dipping low enough that their swirling downdrafts sent snow in violent spirals across the orchard. The tension soared further when Director Bennett received a cryptic notice from Colonel Zimmerman of Presidential Security Command, who relayed that multiple unknown aircraft were converging on the region, their transponders hidden by the storm's havoc. Micah found himself pulled into yet another briefing in the farmhouse's makeshift command center. Originally, his kitchen director Bennett conferred with Secretary Langford, who now wore a forced stoicism. Langford revealed that the briefcase contained more than just classified documents. It held the digital key to a security breach affecting government communication networks. If the infiltration was as widespread as he feared, even certain White House channels could be compromised. That revelation cast a fresh pall. Could the president himself be compromised? No one wanted to voice it openly, but the question lingered in every corner of the makeshift headquarters. If foreign adversaries had successfully infiltrated top-level government communications through a contractor like Nexalon, who was actually pulling the strings? The orchard ironically remained safer to discuss these issues than anywhere else. The outdated phone lines and limited cell coverage here had previously been a nuisance. Now, they were a blessing, preventing prying digital ears from overhearing. Langford asked pointedly about an alternative older system rumored to exist beneath the orchard, a Cold War relic. Micah listened as Langford described a series of backup communication nodes that might be physically located on private land and across the country, hidden as part of historical continuity of government measures. If such a node existed here, it could be the only secure route to transmit proof of Nexalon's infiltration to key individuals who might still be loyal and uncorrupted. A fleeting memory sparked in Micah's mind, his late grandfather's letter sealed in a compartment of an old desk. Moments later, Micah produced it, revealing a time-yellowed page describing an emergency transmission station concealed under a well house on the orchard's north side. Scribbled coordinates, half-coded instructions. He had dismissed it as a relic of Cold War paranoia until now. As the pieces lined up, it became apparent that the orchard was more than just a footnote in continuity planning. It was an actual node, Langford's eyes lit up with a kind of grim determination. If they could reach that station, they could bypass every compromised digital channel. Director Bennett concurred, but time was not on their side. Krlovnian operatives and Nexelon mercenaries were already tightening a noose around the property. A combined infiltration seemed imminent. The orchard might soon become contested ground for an array of forces, each with conflicting allegiances and knowledge of this infiltration. On top of that, the president's arrival was mere minutes away, though by which approach remained uncertain. Micah, who had spent so many afternoons quietly pruning peach trees or fine-tuning the orchard's irrigation system, suddenly found himself planning a high-risk infiltration route through a swirling snowstorm. He and Langford would attempt to reach the rumored station. The orchard's thick underbelly of hidden passageways and old root cellars might give them a chance to travel unnoticed. With a shared look of determination, they resolved to do it quickly, before either the president arrived or the orchard was fully locked down by enemy forces. Ranger led the way down a long, disused tunnel that ran beneath the east porch of the farmhouse. Micah had never traversed it in a full-blown blizzard, but it had proven handy before for transferring crates of peaches or storing equipment during storms. Now it served as a clandestine artery for the orchard's improbable role in national security. The plan was simple, yet fraught with risk: slip out unseen, make their way to the old well house on the orchard's north edge, enter the hidden station, and transmit Langford's data. The corridor was cramped, lined with support beams that had seen better days. Langford, for all his high office, maneuvered with surprising agility, spurred by necessity and residual adrenaline. Though the father's cheeks were pale, drained by hours in the cold, he clung fiercely to that briefcase. Micah admired the man's resolve, aware that every so often the older official let out a wince of pain when he turned too abruptly. The orchard's threshold of safety was quickly vanishing under the swirling chaos above ground. Halfway through, the light from Micah's flashlight flickered off the muzzle of a firearm pointed directly at them. Micah jerked to a halt. Shotgun raised, but no shots were fired. Instead, a low voice hissed, "Federal agents, show me your hands." Micah obeyed, stepping aside enough to reveal Langford. The agent, a woman with short-cropped hair, lowered her weapon instantly when she recognized the Secretary of Treasury. She identified herself as Agent Wu from the National Security Agency's Special Collection Service, accompanied by Agent Foy from the Department of Homeland Security. They claimed to be part of a hush-hush interagency task force that had been investigating Nexelon's infiltration for months, operating under the radar. Because official channels were compromised, their presence was jarring, but it offered potential help. They insisted they had already identified the orchard's hidden well house as a possible old-school comm station. When asked why they were lurking underground, Wu explained they'd tracked an irregular heat signature from the farmhouse to the barn, deducing someone was using covert routes. They guessed it was Langford, so they'd positioned themselves for an intercept. The initial distrust was palpable. Could these be double agents? Langford, however, recognized the reference to an operation code named Gray Falcon, which he'd heard was discontinued but was apparently alive under a different name. Upon hearing that, he allowed himself a measured sigh of relief. If they were indeed part of the unsubsumed intelligence faction, it meant more allies were on site than he had thought. Agent Foy showed them a digital map of the orchard taken by satellite during a break in the storm. It highlighted where Krlovnian forces had set up jamming towers and Nexelon's likely infiltration points. Then it showed a corridor about 250 yards from the old equipment barn to a small outbuilding that matched the coordinates in Micah's grandfather's letter. Wu explained they had minimal time before both Krlovnia and Nexelon closed in, not to mention the final arrival of President Gardner. Wordlessly, the group formed a loose alliance. Foy took point scanning for danger at every junction, while Wu guarded the rear. Micah led them through the labyrinthine orchard paths, guided by memory of how the farm's layout changed during heavy snow. Ranger was on full alert, nose twitching, occasionally letting out soft growls. Emerging from the underground passage into a hidden corner of the equipment barn, they were battered by a sudden onslaught of cold wind. The full force of the blizzard smacked them, seizing their breath. In normal conditions, 250 yards might be quick walking distance, but now it was a gauntlet. Each had about 20 minutes of safe exposure in their thermal gear. They had to make every second count. Foy handed out small jamming modules, each capable of creating a localized interference bubble that masked their heat signatures and radio signals. If they placed them properly, they could cross a portion of the orchard without being spotted by overhead drones or Krlovnian lookouts. Wu set the modules on a timed sequence, ensuring their coverage extended just far enough to get the group within reaching distance of the well house. Then came the moment of truth. Micah swung open the barn's side door, unleashing a swirl of ice crystals into their faces. The orchard beyond was a howling white void. Occasional flares of headlights glimpsed in the distance. Shots echoed at irregular intervals, though muffled by the storm. Whether they signaled warning rounds or full-on engagements, Micah couldn't tell. Pushing aside his fear, he signaled the group forward, and they plunged into the frozen onslaught like climbers tackling Everest. Their journey was surreal and disorienting. Blown snow whipped across their vision, rendering the orchard's neat rows of peach trees into mere shadows. Every gust threatened to knock them off balance, and each step required deliberate effort. As if wading through a swirling soup of icy shards, Ranger darted ahead, turning frequently to check on them, eyes glowing with fierce protectiveness. Agent Wu's jamming modules emitted faint pulses of blue light, creating a narrow corridor where electronic signals were scrambled. Overhead, Nexalon's helicopter searchlights pierced the dark, but whenever one beam angled near them, it scattered into static, giving them precious seconds to move unseen. Krylovnian spotters, presumably using thermal scopes, wouldn't have an easy time detecting them. Either, halfway to the well house, a new complication arose. The orchard's gently sloping terrain gave way to a more pronounced drift, forming a chest-high barrier of snow. Micah climbed it first, then reached down to help pull Langford, who was noticeably struggling. A lesser man might have collapsed under the weight of exhaustion, but Langford gritted his teeth and pushed onward. Wu and Foy did their best to keep pace, occasionally glancing behind them to ensure no sudden shapes emerged from the white void. At one point, the swirling snow thinned just enough for them to glimpse a bizarre sight. Black SUVs inching across the orchard, flanked by armed men in dark winter parkas. They stood out only because of their movement. Everything else was a uniform sheet of gray. Without the jamming modules, that group might have spotted them easily. Micah couldn't tell if it was Krylovnia or Nexalon, perhaps both. He signaled for everyone to crouch low, letting the roiling wind conceal them until the vehicles moved past. During that pause, Micah's mind flashed to the possible arrival of President Gardner. Was the president truly en route, or had the orchard's swirl of chaos forced a detour? A fleeting hope crossed his thoughts. Maybe the president had canceled altogether. But he quickly dismissed it. The official line was that the president was determined to oversee emergency measures personally. Gardner had a reputation for being hands-on, though that same determination could also hint at hidden agendas. After a tense minute, they pressed on. Each footstep crunched in the deafening hush, a paradox of noise surrounded by silent, deadly cold. Micah led them around a half-frozen creek, an irrigation channel that in warmer months watered a chunk of the orchard. The well house rose before them as a small, unassuming shape in the storm. It had once been painted barn red, but most of the paint had peeled, leaving weathered boards half buried in snow. Hardly the image of a top-secret facility that might save the government from infiltration. Reaching the door, Micah handed the group a quick signal. Wait here, he needed to confirm the structure was clear. Entering alone, he discovered a rickety interior with a rusted metal ladder descending about 8 feet to a root-level chamber. Down below, a low-watt light bulb flickered feebly, powered by an ancient generator. The air smelled of damp earth and machinery oil. Wu and Foy followed after Micah's signal. All clear, Langford made his way down the ladder, last carefully maneuvering the still-attached briefcase. The old station was a cramped chamber that looked more like a relic from the 1960s than a functional communications hub. But hidden behind a false wooden panel lay the real prize dormant electronic equipment, dust-laden but clearly built for resilience. Flicking a series of heavy switches, Micah heard an electric hum sputter to life. The manual from his grandfather's letter, which he tucked into a jacket pocket, detailed a sequence of codes required to boot up the legacy comm system. Micah input them on a clunky keypad, heart pounding. If the orchard's rumored station was still operational, they could broadcast Langford's data to multiple secure channels. Channels that foreign infiltration presumably hadn't compromised. Wu assisted occasionally, murmuring approval or verifying steps. Agent Foy kept watch at the ladder, constantly shifting his attention between a handheld scanner and the near-vertical passage above. When Langford connected the specialized device from his briefcase, the ancient console beeped, flickered, and displayed an archaic menu. "It's working," he whispered, relief saturating his voice. "We can send the entire forensic package, including cryptographic proofs of the infiltration." Micah watched as lines of code and data scrolled across the monitor, each representing a piece of evidence that could topple international alliances and reveal the depth of Nexelon's duplicity. If someone had told him this old orchard station would be used for anything more than monitoring crop yields, he'd have laughed. Now, it was the nerve center of what might be the biggest intelligence leak in modern U.S. history, albeit for the good side. That sense of triumph was cut short by the sound of voices above. Sharp barking orders drifted down the ladder, well accompanied by footsteps thudding on the old wooden floor. The group tensed. Foy signaled them to go quiet as he aimed his weapon at the opening. Then came a new voice, deeper weighted with authority. "Secretary Langford, this is President Gardner. I'm ordering you to cease any unauthorized transmissions immediately." Langford froze. Micah's heart skipped a beat. The president was here, but in what capacity? Was he compromised or truly in command of a legitimate rescue? The orchard's storm-buffeted well house was moments from becoming ground zero for a confrontation that could redefine the fate of the entire chain of command. A hush settled over the cramped chamber. From the ladder well, President Emmett Gardner's voice reverberated with calm authority, even muffled by the raging storm outside. "Secretary Langford, do you hear me?" he repeated. Langford's expression hardened, and for a moment he considered shutting down the console to hide any trace of the transmission. But Wu urged him silently to finish sending the data. Micah stood at a pivot point between two men of enormous power. The Secretary of Treasury, who believed some top-level conspirators had compromised the White House, and the president, who might or might not be part of that very conspiracy. Ranger growled, stepping closer to the ladder, as if to block any intruder. Foy raised a finger to his lips. "Complete the upload," he mouthed. "We can't risk losing this chance." Langford turned his attention to the console, confirming that 82% of the file had been transmitted. Another few minutes and every piece of infiltration evidence would be distributed to multiple secure outposts, beyond the reach of any single official or corporate entity. Above, footsteps echoed, but no immediate gunfire or forced entry followed. The tension was agonizing. Micah's chest tightened at the thought of an actual shootout between Secret Service agents loyal to the president and agents loyal to Director Bennett or Secretary Langford. If President Gardner had approached with the wrong intentions, his forces might storm the well house. If the orchard had any symbolic meaning left, it was that the simplest acts like offering help in a storm could spark monumental events. Right now, that spark could become a conflagration. The president spoke again, this time with a sterner edge. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm aware you're the property owner. I've been informed you rescued Secretary Langford last night. Please come up. We need to talk." Micah glanced at Langford, who nodded reluctantly as if to say, "Buy us time." Gathering his courage, Micah motioned for Ranger to stay, then climbed the ladder. The swirling snow stung his cheeks the moment he surfaced. He found himself face to face with President Emmett Gardner, taller than Micah had expected, clad in a heavy dark overcoat. Despite the ferocious weather, Gardner's posture exuded the calm confidence of a man used to commanding. Around him were a handful of Secret Service agents, sidearms holstered, but clearly ready. President Gardner didn't waste time on small talk. "Where's Secretary Langford?" he asked, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Micah hesitated, measuring his words. If the orchard's lore about old alliances and hidden comm stations had taught him anything, it was that not everyone with an official badge could be trusted. "He's safe, Mr. President," Micah replied. "Warming up. This entire farm is half frozen." A vague answer enough to confirm Langford was alive. Gardner's pale eyes narrowed. "I don't have time for half answers, Mr. Caldwell. We've got at least 2 foreign elements on this property, plus mercenaries from Nexelon. I need to ensure Langford's well-being before they get their hands on him or on whatever he's carrying." Micah's pulse hammered. Was the president's concern genuine, or an effort to confiscate the briefcase? The orchard was a stage for overlapping illusions, each side trying to outmaneuver the other. Gathering the courage to speak, Micah asked, "Permission to speak frankly?" Sir Gardner inclined his head. "Go ahead." Micah drew a breath that tasted of ice. "I saw Kralovnian convoys and Nexelon contractors out there, but I also saw them retreat the moment your forces arrived. This orchard's become a battlefield, and I don't even fully understand why. All I know is Secretary Langford and his family were stranded. I helped them. The next thing I know, I'm in the middle of multiple government agencies, each telling me different truths. So is the White House compromised." "Are you compromised?" A flicker crossed the president's face. Annoyance or respect, perhaps both. He signaled for the agents to wait by the door, giving him a moment of privacy with Micah. The hush was broken only by the savage wind whistling through broken boards. Tundra Caldwell Gardner began measured. I'm aware of the infiltration problems. Nexalon's hardware is suspected of creating backdoor vulnerabilities in our top-tier systems. Secretary Langford had insisted on verifying the data before we took any official action, so we designated Safehouse Delta for a thorough analysis. But the storm changed everything. Langford's convoy got separated. In the confusion, the Krolovnians and Nexalon saw an opportunity. My motorcade was forced to reroute multiple times. And yes, there are elements in the administration that might be compromised. That's why I came here personally to keep Langford safe while we root out the infiltration. But I can't protect him if he's acting outside standard protocols. Micah let that sink in. Acting outside standard protocols could easily mean exposing the infiltration to those not in the chain of command, or maybe the president was telling the truth that he was here to shield Langford and ensure the infiltration data reached the right hands. The orchard's swirling chaos left no easy path to clarity. Down below, Micah heard the faint whir of legacy electronics. The data transmission was likely nearing completion. If Gardner sensed that a rogue communication was happening mere feet away, he didn't show it. Instead, he gestured for Micah to walk with him outside, away from the well house's immediate entrance. The president's security detail followed at a cautious distance, scanning the storm with alert eyes. Suddenly, the orchard lights flickered, drawing Micah's attention to the horizon. Through the slanting snow, distant shapes appeared additional vehicles from Joint Special Operations Command, clearly more advanced than the typical black SUVs. They were taking up positions, apparently driving out both Krolovnian and Nexalon forces, who retreated or hunkered down at the perimeter. Helicopters overhead pivoted their lights, veering away from the orchard center. All at once, the orchard became less claustrophobic, yet more uncertain. Gardner offered a faint smile, noticing Micah's gaze Sock's arrival. I told them to clear out the hostiles so we can sort this out in relative peace. That's why I've been telling people to stand down. But I need Secretary Langford to trust that the White House is not compromised. Do you have proof you're not compromised, Sir Micah said, surprising himself with his bluntness. The president's eyes flickered, perhaps at the unusual directness. The fact that I'm here risking personal safety might be proof enough. When I found out the infiltration could reach the highest echelons of power, including my staff, I made it a personal mission to handle matters face-to-face in places our digital footprints can't be exploited. Micah swallowed. If Gardner was telling the truth, then his presence at the orchard was a heroic stand, not a conspiratorial move. But if he was lying, Secretary Langford's entire mission to expose infiltration was at risk. The orchard stood on a razor's edge, and he, Micah Caldwell, peach farmer, was stuck in the middle. Meanwhile, down in the hidden station, Secretary Joseph Langford and Agents Wu and Foy remained hunched over the console. The final data blocks were uploading, creeping slowly across the archaic interface. Langford's heart thudded with every beep. If they had gotten this far, evading Krolovnian infiltration, Nexalon gunships in a freak storm, he refused to fail. Now transmission at 99%. Wu muttered, glancing at a side panel. We're seconds away from sending conclusive evidence to NSA Director Goodwin, Admiral Ryan at Strategic Command, and the Deputy Attorney General. That covers 3 separate channels, each authorized to coordinate rapid response to infiltration. A scraping sound from above made them freeze. They were sure Micah had led the president out of earshot, but the orchard's decrepit boards amplified every shuffle Ranger left behind as a guard began a warning growl. Langford's breath caught. If Gardner had doubled back, he might forcibly halt the upload. With a final beep, the console displayed. Transmission complete. Langford exhaled in a mixture of relief and terror. It's done, he whispered. They have it. Foy nodded, stepping to the ladder. We can't stay. They'll see the console is active. We have to move, and quickly. Up top, Ranger barked. Foy peered through a gap in the boards. He saw no immediate threat. The president's security detail was out of sight, presumably at the far corner. With Micah, let's go, he urged Langford, followed with slow, careful steps, the precious briefcase still handcuffed to his wrist out of habit, though the real data was no longer inside. The moment they climbed from the well house, the wind assaulted them with renewed vigor, as if personally offended they'd stayed warm for too long. Wu shielded her eyes and pointed east, where they saw more swirling lights. The faint beams of specialized JSOC vehicles cutting through drifts. No sooner had they taken a few steps than shadows appeared from behind a battered orchard tractor. Foy raised his weapon. Wu mirrored him, but they hesitated, recognizing the silhouettes in time. It was a cluster of Secret Service agents under Director Alexandra Bennett. She marched up snow, clinging to her hair and eyelashes, her expression taut. Secretary Langford, we've secured the orchard's perimeter in coordination with JSOC. Krlovnian and Nexelon operatives are contained and the president has ordered them to stand down. Langford sensed the subtext. He gave that order personally. Yes, Bennett confirmed, and he's demanding your immediate presence. Sir, I've observed him for years, and I believe he's actually trying to safeguard you. But you have to handle this carefully. If you defy a direct presidential request in front of these agencies, it could appear mutinous. Langford exchanged a look with Wu. The data was sent, so the immediate threat had passed. Where is he? Bennett gestured behind them. He's near the orchard's northern boundary with Mr. Caldwell. They're waiting. He says it's time for an honest conversation about the infiltration. Langford hesitated. Director, are we sure he's not compromised? Bennett's brow furrowed. We can't be absolutely certain. But the president did bring in JSOC to neutralize threats instead of letting Krlovnia or Nexelon roam free. That's a major point in his favor. She paused. If we want to avoid a constitutional crisis meeting, him is our best route. With a resigned nod, Langford took the lead, joined by Wu and Foy on either flank, and Director Bennett just behind Upalden. They advanced through the orchard, the storm still fierce, though signs of its eventual tapering flickered in the distance. The last hours had felt like days. More gunfire had subsided into an uneasy hush. All around, Secret Service agents and uniformed JSOC personnel methodically canvassed the orchard, ensuring no hidden pockets of foreign or corporate operatives lingered. Micah and President Gardner stood by an old orchard fence partially dismantled to allow a path for vehicles. A hush fell over the orchard as Langford approached. Ranger came bounding over to rejoin Langford, then circled around to Micah's side, uncertain who needed more protection. The president surveyed the group. Secretary Langford, are you harmed? Langford shook his head. No, sir. Minor cold exposure, but I'll manage. Gardner nodded. Good. Because we have a lot to discuss, and I'd prefer no one else freeze to death on my watch tonight. He cast a glance at Wu and Foy, discerning from their gear they were off-book intelligence operators. Then he saw the faint glimmer of relief in Langford's eyes. You did what you felt necessary, didn't you? Langford straightened his posture, not flinching. Yes, sir, I did. Because the infiltration extends into the highest circles of our infrastructure, and I wasn't entirely sure how far it reached, the president's jaw tightened. That infiltration is real. I've never denied it, but the White House is not part of it. I came here to ensure its final downfall. If you'd spoken to me directly, you would have known. Instead, we nearly orchestrated a fiasco with Krlovnia and Nexelon. A fierce wind whipped between them, swirling snow around their boots. Micah felt the orchard itself was holding its breath. Listening to these two men dance around the real question, were they on the same side? Langford studied the president. Then why the secrecy, sir? Why travel in a way that compromised your own safety? Even Director Bennett seemed unsure of your motives. Gardner glanced briefly at Bennett, who offered a small nod. I had to keep my staff in the dark until the last possible moment. We suspect a mole high in the Secret Service detail, possibly multiple. If we use standard procedures, the infiltration might have been tipped off. This orchard is part of an older continuity of government network, and I knew that once we activated the fallback plan, all eyes would converge here. I gambled that Krlovnia and Nexelon would overreach, revealing themselves. He paused, letting the swirling snow quiet, and so they did. Micah broke his silence. So you deliberately lured them here, knowing how important Secretary Langford's evidence was. The president offered a thin smile. Maybe not deliberately lured them to your farm, Mr. Caldwell, but we knew they'd move on any sign of Langford's vulnerability. If that vulnerability happened to be real, your rescue of him, a better chance they'd expose themselves. Your orchard's place in the old system was the perfect final stop. That's exactly what happened. We've ID'd multiple foreign operatives, recovered tampered hardware, and forced Nexelon's hand. Langford blinked, weighing the words. You risked an actual infiltration success if anything had gone wrong. Gardner's voice hardened, and you risked turning this into a standoff that might have escalated into domestic gunfire between rival security factions. Then he exhaled, letting the anger slip. But in the end, we achieved our objective. We crippled the infiltration gathered evidence. He glanced at the briefcase, though it was now mostly symbolic, and neutralized the immediate threat. Langford inhaled sharply in the freezing air. Then we need to start damage control, sir. Those compromised systems are still out there. JSOC and the loyal factions of the intelligence community will handle it, Gardner replied. But we must do it quietly. If we announce a major government infiltration global markets and international alliances could shatter overnight, Krylovnia will deny involvement. Nexelon will spin any leak. We handle it internally. The orchard sank into silence again. Micah realized he had no place in deciding matters of national secrecy. Still, he couldn't help feeling the orchard itself, with all its hidden corners and generational legacy, had served a purpose neither he nor his grandfather had ever anticipated. By dawn, icebound fury began to lose its grip on Hollow Creek Township. The wind settled into weary gusts and the snowfall lightened, revealing the orchard in a battered but majestic stillness. JSOC vehicles and Secret Service SUVs populated the farmland like a surreal convoy. Ranger, exhausted, trotted around the porch, sniffing out leftover footprints in the snow. The orchard was a tableau of near catastrophe, scattered bullet casings where skirmishes had erupted, large churned-up tracks from fleeing Krylovnian vehicles, a crashed Nexelon helicopter far to the west, though the pilot had survived, and a main barn that had half its heating system destroyed. The entire property bore the aftermath of a conflict that to outside eyes might look like a chaotic war zone. Yet in the quiet hush of morning sunlight reflected off the snow-draped peach trees with a ghostly beauty. Inside the farmhouse, the atmosphere had shifted. Agents hustled with clipped efficiency, coordinating detainees, verifying body counts. Thankfully minimal, and collecting advanced jamming equipment for forensic analysis. Director Bennett, wearing an expression that was both relieved and dog-tired, approached Micah. "We have a tally," she said softly, handing him a list of orchard damages. "Multiple bullet impacts in your outer barn walls, some orchard equipment, stolen or destroyed, a few orchard rows run over by heavy vehicles. I'm authorized to tell you that the government will compensate at Black Book rates. Basically, we'll handle it." Micah scanned the list. "Decades of orchard work undone by the events of a single night. I appreciate it," he responded quietly. "Though I'd give up more than that to keep innocent people from freezing or ending up in a shootout." Bennett gave a nod of understanding. The orchard's role here was critical. More than you'll ever see in an official history book. Secretary Langford joined them, seeming much recovered. Marina, Tim, and Ella remained in the living room, still disguised as an ordinary family, though Micah now knew they were anything but. The children sipped warm cocoa while Marina thanked the agents who'd helped nurse them overnight. Micah, Langford said, addressing him by first name, "Your orchard saved my life in more ways than one. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." Micah shrugged, shifting uncomfortably in the presence of such high praise. "You'd have done the same if you saw people half frozen. My family taught me that you don't just drive by if you see someone in need, though I guess I never expected a U.S. cabinet member to be in that position." Langford cracked a weary smile, "Nor did I. But you've seen firsthand how complicated these storms can be, political or otherwise." Gardner himself entered, escorted by a pair of Secret Service agents. The orchard's main living area suddenly felt crowded, as though the presence of the commander-in-chief brought an almost palpable weight. Yet the president appeared more approachable now, if still reserved. He extended a hand to Micah. "We haven't had a proper introduction," Gardner said. "Micah Caldwell, I'm aware of your service record and your orchard's significance. Thank you for going." And beyond, Micah's handshake was firm, though the surreal nature of greeting the president in his own living room struck him. "Sir, I'm just trying to keep the orchard running." The president glanced at Langford, nodded as if affirming a private conversation, then turned back to Micah. "I came to confirm that this orchard remains operational in the continuity of government framework. If you're amenable, we'll restore it and keep the station below the well house on standby, quietly. The old legacy network will get an upgrade, but we'll maintain its independence from the main grid." Blinking, Micah processed this. "You mean like an official backup site? Nothing official in the public sense," Gardner clarified. "But yes, your farm is part of an older tapestry of national defense and crisis management. And given the infiltration we just uncovered, older methods are sometimes safer than state-of-the-art tech." Micah recalled his grandfather's cryptic letter. It had mentioned alliances with the government that the Caldwell farm had upheld for decades. Perhaps his ancestors had always known the orchard had a dual purpose, feeding communities in peaceful times, sheltering the nation's secrets in warlike ones. "I'd be honored, I suppose. My biggest worry is how we keep it hush-hush. If entire convoys keep showing up," Gardner almost smiled, "we'll be more discreet." This storm was an extreme scenario. A hush fell, acknowledging the extraordinary events. Then the president asked Secretary Langford, Have you debriefed Director Bennett on the success of your transmission? Langford gave a curt nod. Yes, sir. The infiltration data has reached multiple secure nodes. The relevant leaders will coordinate a takedown of compromised Nexalon hardware. We'll proceed carefully, avoid panic. I'll personally handle the Krlovnian diplomatic fallout, and assuming they even want to keep up the charade. Gardner's posture eased. Good. Then we just have to ensure everyone here remains quiet about the orchard's role in all of this. His gaze landed on Micah. I'm authorizing a specialized non-disclosure. You'll be compensated, your orchard repaired, and your privacy maintained. The official story will be that you assisted with a standard winter rescue, Micah exhaled. Fine by me, sir. I'm not looking for fame. I just want to keep my orchard alive and feed the local community like my granddad and father did. Gardner offered a small smile. That's the essence of our country, Mr. Caldwell, people doing the right thing without expecting reward. Outside, the orchard glistened under the new morning light, each tree a sparkling testament to the brutal cold it had endured. Dozens of individuals, agents, soldiers, pilots, bustled about assessing damage or packing up high-tech gear. Hollow Creek Township's main roads were still clogged with ice, but heavy-duty plows now battled the drifts. President Gardner's personal helicopter awaited him in a makeshift landing zone near the orchard's west field, its rotors spinning lazily as if impatient to leave behind the chaotic scene. I'll be departing soon, Gardner announced. Director Bennett, coordinate a thorough site cleanup. Secretary Langford will finalize your transport once the airways are fully cleared. We don't want a repeat of last night. Langford shook the president's hand. Understood, sir, and thank you. That left Micah standing at the farmhouse steps, ranger beside him, as the cadre of vehicles and helicopters prepared to depart. The orchard, once overrun with black SUVs and armed figures, was gradually restoring itself to something resembling normalcy, or as normal as it could be after bullets and sabotage. A wave of emotions rolled through Micah, relief that the immediate danger had passed, a strange wistfulness that the orchard's secrets might again slip into obscurity, and an undercurrent of lingering adrenaline that made him feel he hadn't truly taken a deep breath in hours. He exchanged goodbyes with some of the agents. Agent Dane, formerly in the front lines of the farmhouse's defense, promised to visit again if orchard security protocols needed routine checks. Agent Browning, who had run the security feed from a tablet, gave a terse nod that almost passed for a smile. Even Wu and Foy, the off-book intelligence operatives, offered subtle waves. Each was about to vanish back into agencies that rarely acknowledged their existence. Last to approach was Secretary Langford, carrying a sense of profound gratitude. A new heaviness, too, as if the events had weighed on him more than he let on. Tim and Ella clung quietly to their mother, Marina, who still wore a subdued smile of thanks. Mr. Caldwell, Langford said, gently placing a hand on Micah's shoulder, "You're a genuine example of what a citizen can be. You saved my family from the cold, and you gave me the time I needed to protect this nation's continuity." That's not an exaggeration. Micah coughed, a tad embarrassed. I'm just relieved it worked out. I can't say it was a calm night. He gestured to the orchard. We might have lost some trees equipment, but as long as we keep the orchard going, I'll consider it a win. Langford nodded. I've insisted to the president that your orchard will be fully restored. Leaning in, he added, if ever you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. You have more allies in D.C. than you realize. Ranger nudged Tim and Ella goodbye, as if sensing they too had formed a bond in the barn's darkest hours. The children giggled softly, patting the dog's head. Marina mouthed a silent thank you to Micah, tears glistening in her eyes. Then they followed a Secret Service escort to a waiting vehicle. Micah breathed in the frigid air, letting the swirling remnants of icebound fury pass over him. He watched the motorcade slip away, flanked by newly arrived plows as the orchard slowly, gloriously reclaimed its stillness. The crisis had been a flash flood of espionage, subterfuge, and near-death experiences. Now that it was ebbing, the orchard's stoic presence comforted him. Inside, he discovered President Gardner had left a handwritten note on the kitchen table, sealed in an envelope. Micah hesitated, then opened it. The message was short. Thank you for safeguarding Secretary Langford and his family. The orchard has a legacy of patriotism, quiet, invisible, but immeasurably valuable. I trust it remains so in the coming years. Micah closed his eyes. He pictured his grandfather, who had once told him that the orchard's roots ran deeper than mere fruit trees, that behind the straightforward labor of turning soil and nurturing crops, there was a calling to stand firm in storms, be they literal or metaphorical. In his wildest imagination, Mike had never envisioned a storm so fierce that the highest levels of government would gather here, let alone rely on him. But it seemed his grandfather had prepared for such a scenario decades ago. Days later, as the state of emergency lifted, cleanup began in earnest. Micah oversaw the orchard's repair crews, assisted by a discreet team of government contractors who arrived with minimal fanfare. They replaced bullet-riddled boards, hauled away the remains of a downed Nexalon helicopter, and meticulously restored any orchard rows damaged by heavy vehicle treads. The orchard's battered barns were patched, the sabotage undone, and new lines for advanced but covert communications were threaded underground. Director Bennett stayed long enough to finalize the orchard's reclassification as a Tier 2 continuity station, meaning that while not a primary site, it held strategic backup status. She assured Micah that the orchard would no longer see massive convoys unless another dire crisis arose, yet it would remain under a protective watch hidden behind innocuous departmental titles like rural agricultural support. From the orchard's highest vantage point near the gently sloping hill that overlooked Hollow Creek Township, Micah surveyed the renewed land. Snow still clung to the orchard, but the worst of the blizzard had passed, revealing a crisp sky where the sun shone with winter brilliance. On a calm day, you could see smoke rising from distant farmhouses, a reminder that life carried on. It was surreal to think that mere days ago, this orchard had been the stage for an international standoff, with spies, foreign diplomats, and even the President of the United States crossing paths. When Micah's father was alive, they'd occasionally speak of storms. Storms test your mettle, his father would say, and if you're prepared, you come out stronger. This storm was like no other. Micah realized how ill-prepared he had felt at the onset. Yet somehow everything his family had passed down this orchard's layout, the root cellar, expansions, the dusty old letter from his grandfather, had come together at the perfect time. It was almost as if fate or generational foresight had guided him. He took a moment to reflect on the intangible costs. Yes, the orchard would recover, the bullet holes in buildings could be repaired, and the fields would eventually yield fruit again. But the orchard's tranquility would never be the same. Micah doubted he could walk these rows without recalling the flash of muzzle fire or the hush of men and women speaking in urgent whispers about infiltration and sabotage. He also doubted he could ever forget the sight of a terrified family half frozen in a buried sedan, or the intense stare of a Tui who refused to leave his side throughout the ordeal. Yet in that recollection, he also found pride. He'd performed his duty as a citizen, a caretaker of the land, and a protector of those in need. No official medals or speeches would come his way. This entire saga would remain classified in the shadows. But perhaps that was fitting. Orchards thrived on quiet diligence, the patient sowing and reaping of the earth away from the fanfare and headlines. One afternoon, as the rest of the cleanup teams prepared to depart, Micah stood by the reconstituted main barn, running his hand along the fresh beams that replaced splintered wood. A black SUV he recognized from the flurry of government presence pulled up. Agent Dane stepped out, face unreadable. "Just checking in. Any final needs before we close out?" Micah shrugged. "We're good, thanks, Agent Dane." She handed him a sealed document, official non-disclosure agreement. "You signed a preliminary version, but this is the final. Also some contact numbers in case you ever see suspicious activity around the orchard. We may have new watchers." He grimaced but nodded. Signing it felt like formalizing that chapter as a secret he'd carry for life probably. But maybe that was part of the orchard's calling. Accepting the pen, he wrote his name. Agent Dane departed with a polite wave, leaving Micah alone again. He felt the weight of the orchard's centuries-old legacy on his shoulders, but it was a weight he was willing to bear. Months drifted by, and the orchard sprang back to life as the snows finally melted. Peach blossoms emerged in delicate pinks and whites, a testimony to nature's resilience. During the off-season, Micah poured himself into refurbishment projects, upgrading equipment, not only for farming, but also ensuring the hidden station beneath the well house remained functional. While official tasks were handled by the covert technicians, Micah supervised from a distance. Wanting to stay informed, he thought often of Secretary Langford and his family. There were occasional messages, short cryptic thank yous, or general inquiries about orchard shipments arriving through back channels. Micah gleaned that Langford and his family continued to serve in critical capacities. Nexalon Global Industries faced quiet federal investigations, with resignations and closed-door hearings hinting at the infiltration's unraveling. Krolovnia, for its part, turned silent on the diplomatic front, presumably recalibrating its tactics. For Micah, the orchard resumed a semblance of normal life. Workers arrived in spring, new saplings were planted, and local businesses reopened as the region recovered from one of the worst winters on record. Hollows and gullies in the orchard still bore the scars of tire tracks from the black SUVs, but with each passing rain the evidence faded. Only in certain pockets like the bullet dents in a rusted tractor or the freshly replaced side panels in the main barn was there tangible proof that something extraordinary had occurred here. Ranger remained a loyal companion, prowling the orchard edges and sniffing out deer or rabbits. Sometimes he would stop at the well house, sniff around the ladder that led to the hidden station as if expecting more uninvited guests. Micah would pat the dog's head, both relieved and unsettled by the memories. As orchard life calmed, Micah found solace in the same routines that had grounded him before the blizzard. The early dawn checks, the soothing hum of irrigation pumps, the rustle of leaves in a gentle wind. But underneath it all, a quiet awareness had taken root. He was part of a deeper web of national security, a steward of a place whose significance stretched far beyond peaches and local commerce. Sometimes at night, he recalled the images of that fateful day, the moment he first spotted the stranded sedan, the jarring arrival of Director Bennett, the swirl of Krylovnian and Nexalon forces, and most vividly, the calm yet commanding presence of President Gardner. It was an intersection of fate and duty that nobody in Hollow Creek Township would ever fully believe if they hadn't witnessed it themselves. Standing in the orchard at dusk, Micah watched the sun cast long shadows across the rows. The distant hills glowed with the last golden light of day. He felt an unexpected comfort in knowing he wasn't alone in carrying the orchard's secret. Generations of Caldwells had nurtured this land, each leaving a slight layer of legacy. Now his generation had guarded more than farmland. They'd guarded the continuity of a government. That knowledge, though destined to remain hidden, gave him a renewed sense of purpose. In a world swirling with talk of infiltration, conspiracies, and shifting allegiances, the orchard had proven that compassion, a simple act of rescuing a family in trouble, could spark changes on a national scale. The orchard, with its silent rows and sturdy beams, had been the stage for heroes and traitors, loyalty and deception. When the next storm came, be it literal or metaphorical, Micah Caldwell and his peach orchard would be ready, because while storms might test your mettle, each time you survive them, you emerge stronger, more grounded, and quietly prepared to do it all again. He took a final steadying breath, recalling a phrase from his grandfather's old letter. Sometimes the most important duties are the ones nobody ever knows you performed. That resonated now more than ever. Micah turned back toward the farmhouse, Ranger padding faithfully at his side. The orchard's hush enveloped him, gently whispering that the land and the nation it sheltered would endure, so long as decent people remained willing to help one another in the face of any storm. Looking back at everything that happened, I can't help but be grateful for the way it all turned out. Our everyday hero, the farmer, never planned on confronting powerful insiders or outsmarting foreign operatives. Yet he rose to the challenge to protect not just a stranded family, but the nation itself. Underneath all the intrigue and potential betrayals, it was human compassion that steered the course. Saving those in need during a raging blizzard became the catalyst for unraveling a massive conspiracy. Now, as the orchard recovers and the snow finally melts, new friendships and alliances have taken root in that fertile ground of trust and bravery. What do you think about the choices our characters made? Were there moments you found especially thrilling or moving? We'd love to hear your opinions and keep the conversation going. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts, and let's discuss how ordinary people can do extraordinary things when put to the test. After all, no storm lasts forever, and sometimes the most profound acts of heroism begin with a simple decision to help someone in need.